Origin Unexplained.
Are you into UFOs and biochemical leaks and conspiracies? Well, you might want to pay attention. This is Origin Unexplained, and I'm Sue. And this is site number 3. First, we uncovered Plum Island, where diseases were weaponized and leaked into the world. Then we pulled back the curtain on Fort Detrick, where viruses, mind control, and government secrets still echo through locked halls. Now, we head into the Utah desert. Dugway Proving Ground. Yes, a place so secret, so remote that most Americans have never even heard of it. But here's a question. What if you were part of something of their test and never even knew it? What if something they did out there changed something in here? Let's talk about what's really happening at Dugway. Dugway Proving Ground was officially established in 1942 during the height of World War II. While the nation focused on battles overseas, the military kind of carved out over 800,000 acres of remote Utah desert to test the weapons that they didn't want seen or sometimes even acknowledged. This wasn't just tanks and rifles, guys. Dugway was chosen for one reason: isolation. Out there, they could release chemical weapons into the open air, right? They could drop mustard gas, anthrax simulants, and other biological agents from planes without ever worrying if a civilian stumbled onto it or into it. It was far enough from everything, but close enough to watch. The land was flat, dry, and perfect for controlled burns, dispersal tests, and large-scale operations. The U.S. Army Chemical Corps took over the facility and quickly began expanding its capabilities. Yes, Dugway became the go-to location for testing munitions laced with toxic payloads. Between 1942 and 1945, over 500 chemical tests were conducted there, including bombs laced with VX nerve agent, sarin, and mustard gas. But it didn't stop after the war. In fact, Dugway became even more active during the Cold War as fears of biological and chemical attacks escalated. The mindset was simple. If someone else might use it on us, we needed to understand it first, and that's when the testing ramped up, and so did the accidents. After World War II, Dugway didn't slow down, it expanded. As tensions rose with the Soviet Union, the U.S. military ramped up its efforts to develop and understand every possible chemical and biological weapon in the arsenal. Dugway became the center of that research. The facility began simulating large-scale attacks and testing how chemical agents dispersed in various weather conditions and how they lingered in the environment and how fast they could kill. They released bacteria into the open air, some of it supposedly harmless, just to see how far it would spread. Tracer organisms were sprayed into the wind and tracked for miles. And this wasn't contained indoors. These tests were done in the open desert. In some cases, clouds of test agents drifted beyond the boundary of the base. That's when the questions started, okay? One of the Dugway's most disturbing moments came in March of '68. Thousands of sheep, over 6,000 of them, suddenly dropped dead near Skull Valley, not far from the base. Ranchers woke up to find entire flocks lying motionless in the fields. The cause? Wasn't drought, wasn't disease. It was a nerve agent. Now, the Army initially denied it, but eventually admitted that a test had gone wrong. VX nerve agent had been sprayed from a jet as part of a classified test. Something went sideways and a chemical cloud drifted off base, and it settled over the grazing land. The sheep suffocated. Their nervous systems shut down. Their bodies convulsed. This wasn't just collateral damage. It was a public relations nightmare. And even though the military paid for damages, they never admitted full responsibility. The incident remains one of the clearest known leaks of a chemical weapon on U.S. soil. And if it had happened to the sheep, how many people might have been exposed? The 1968 sheep kill pulled back the curtain just a little, showing the public what Dugway was capable of, but it was only a glimpse. Most of what's happened out there has stayed buried. The real scope of testing, both chemical and biological, was far bigger than the military ever wanted people to know. But by the 1950s and 1960s, Dugway had become a cornerstone of the Cold War weapons network. What began as a desert testing ground evolved into a scientific maze of laboratories, bunkers, and underground chambers. And on the surface, it was about defense research. In reality, it was about perfecting the art of invisible warfare. The goal was to know how to kill without ever firing a bullet. Throughout the Cold War, Dugway conducted hundreds of open-air experiments designed to study the spread of biological agents. The Army claimed most were simulant organisms, supposedly harmless stand-ins for anthrax and plague. But even those simulants, like Bacillus globigii and Serratia marcescens, were not as safe as advertised. They were sprayed over wide areas to measure how far a biological cloud could travel, how weather changed its path, and how quickly it could reach population centers. Balloons, aircraft, and even drones were used to release the bacteria into the wind in some cases. They followed the trail for more than 100 miles. The idea was simple. If an enemy ever launched a biological strike, the United States needed to know exactly what it would look like. Inside Dugway, scientists tested nerve gases such as the VX and sarin, blister agents like mustard gas, and experimental compounds that never received official names. They studied how fast they could kill, what concentrations were most efficient, and how to deploy them discreetly. Underground tunnels were built to simulate enemy bunkers. Animals, sheep, goats, monkeys, they were all placed in cages to measure the effects. Some tests involved human volunteers from the military. Others may not have been as voluntary as records suggest. This was the height of the arms race. Every chemical that could paralyze or disorient an enemy was on the table. Dugway was where the theoretical turned real. Yet, for all the data collected, one question remained unspoken. What happened to all that residue? All the residue, guys. The leftover toxins. The stuff that swept into the soil and into the air. No one ever offered a clear answer. Official reports said the area was decontaminated. But even decades later, workers described finding strange sealed canisters buried in the sand. Containers marked only with faded stencils and coded numbers. By the 1970s, official word was that chemical weapons testing had ended. International pressure was mounting. Treaties were being signed. The Army announced a cleanup and decommissioning of programs tied to nerve gas and biological warfare. On paper, Dugway's mission had changed, but the desert tells a different story. There were too many unexplained operations, too many closed-door experiments, and too many witnesses who saw things that didn't fit the new narrative. Helicopters still flew at night, low, silent, and unmarked. Locals reported bright flashes over the mountains, followed by the chemical smells that burned the throat and the eyes. Hunters came across dead jackrabbits, coyotes, and deer lying in clusters, their bodies showing no signs of trauma. One former worker said the test chambers were never fully decontaminated. They were just sealed off and abandoned. Another remembered being told to never look directly toward the range after dark. When he asked why, his supervisor only said, because some things you can't unsee. Travelers passing through the area described strange glowing objects hovering over the flats, sometimes blue, sometimes orange, moving too fast for aircraft, but too controlled to be random. Locals nicknamed the lights Dugway Ghosts. Drivers on the back roads spoke of losing radio contact and feeling sudden waves of nausea as if the air itself turned heavy. Campers who ventured too close to the perimeter fence told of hearing a deep mechanical hum beneath the ground, a vibration that made their teeth chatter. Military personnel have their own stories, though most are careful about what they share. A retired radar technician once claimed he saw the object the size of a bus hovering above the test range for nearly 10 minutes before it shot straight up and vanished. Another recalled recovering wreckage from an unknown aerial vehicle and being told to log it as debris from a weather balloon. Sound familiar? Weather balloon? There are even whispers that Dugway became a secondary Roswell, a storage site for anything the government couldn't explain but didn't want to destroy. Then there are the people who claim Dugway isn't just above ground. Truckers who delivered supplies in the 1980s spoke of elevator platforms large enough to lower entire convoys below the desert floor. Did you catch that? Convoys below the desert floor, yes. A few swore they heard screams echoing through the ventilation shafts late at night. Human, not animal. Some dismissed it as imagination, others didn't sleep for days. Even today, the region around Dugway remains a dead zone for information. Cell signals drop without reason. Compasses spin near certain ridges, and anyone who stops too long near the main entrance will eventually be met by a security vehicle that seems to appear out of nowhere. Dugway Proving Ground may have changed its mission statement, but secrecy never left the desert. It only went deeper underground. If Dugway's military operations were strange, the skies above it were something else entirely. By the late 1970s, reports of unidentified flying objects around the Utah desert had become so frequent that locals stopped calling them UFOs and started referring to them simply as visitors. The shapes varied, some triangular, others circular, a few shaped like elongated cylinders that glowed from within. They were often seen moving in silence, hovering above the range before streaking away at impossible speeds. On some nights, multiple objects appeared together, weaving intricate patterns like a coordinated drill. Residents from nearby Toole County and the Skull Valley area claim these craft were not random. They seemed drawn to the boundaries of the proving ground, particularly near the chemical and biological test sectors. One rancher described seeing a bright pulsing orb hovering low over his herd late one evening. The next morning, 3 of his cattle were dead. No blood, no tracks, no struggle. Their organs had been removed with surgical precision, and there was no sign of scavengers. Military trucks appeared within hours, and they cordoned off the field and left without explanation. The rancher never saw them again. Stories like that began stacking up. Sheep, cows, even wild horses were found mutilated or completely dissected in patterns eerily similar to the famous cases in New Mexico and Colorado. Yeah. Radiation meters brought by curious researchers spiked near the remains, sometimes registering brief surges strong enough to trigger alarms. Others reported finding burn marks in the sand shaped like perfect circles, as if something hot had landed and lifted away. In the 1980s, rumors began circulating about a Dugway crash. According to several sources, including a former Air Force communications officer, something went down near the test range during a storm in '78. Witnesses described an object the color of gunmetal, with no visible seams or rivets. The military sealed off the area immediately. Locals reported a convoy of unmarked trucks and helicopters working through the night. By morning, the site was stripped bare. The only thing left behind was a patch of scorched ground and a chemical smell that lingered for weeks. One eyewitness, a retired firefighter from Grantsville, later said he and 2 others had been dispatched to what they were told was a downed aircraft. When they arrived, armed soldiers stopped them a mile from the scene. They were told to turn off their radios and leave immediately. Now, I'm going to take a break here to tell you something. So, for those of you that are not familiar with Lyme and the co-infections, you may be noticing that my voice is giving out, and this is one of the symptoms of it. No matter how much I clear my throat and drink water, it just starts going. So bear with me here. He recalled seeing something metallic half buried in the sand before being forced back. A week later, every man who'd been in on the call was transferred to a different department. Yes, they were. UFO investigators who tried to access the surrounding public lands began noticing strange interference. Cameras malfunctioned. Batteries drained instantly. Some researchers reported hearing low-frequency tones like deep mechanical drones. They grew louder and closer when they got to the fence line. There were even claims of men in black SUVs following vehicles back to nearby motels and taking photographs of license plates. Radiation readings around Dugway have remained a mystery of their own. Levels fluctuate without reason, sometimes spiking for hours, then vanishing entirely. Scientists have suggested it could be residual contamination from weapons testing. Yeah, right. Others believe it's something else. Something related to the energy signatures seen when those unidentified craft appear. Whatever the cause, it's kept the region under a constant cloud of secrecy. By the late 1990s, Dugway had gained a nickname among UFO researchers, Area 52. The comparison to Groom Lake wasn't just for show. There were whispers that Dugway had absorbed experimental aircraft projects that were once based at Area 51. Black triangles, silent hovering vehicles, and hybrid propulsion systems supposedly powered by electromagnetic or plasma-based technology were all reportedly tested there. To this day, strange lights are still seen over the desert, silent, deliberate, and unexplainable, of course. Some say Dugway is where recovered craft are reverse engineered. Others believe it's where biological and extraterrestrial research coverage and intersection of the two of the government's most secretive worlds. Whatever the truth is, it sits under miles of sand, protected by silence, security, and a reputation so strange that most people dismiss it without looking deeper. By the early 2000s, Dugway Proving Ground was once again reinventing itself. Officially, it had shifted focus toward defensive biological research, a phrase meant to reassure the public that everything being done was to protect against biological warfare, not create it. Nope, not create it, of course not. Yet, behind those polished words, the same old shadows lingered. The facility expanded, new laboratories were constructed, and once again, classified projects quietly resumed under the banner of national security. Modern Dugway became the testing heart for what the military called biopreparedness. Its mission, at least on paper, was to study how to detect, identify, and neutralize biological threats. But to do that, they needed real pathogens. Of course, what do we get to then? Bacillus anthracis, the bacteria that causes anthrax, became one of their primary tools. They began producing controlled samples of live spores, supposedly sterilized before being shipped to outside laboratories. Those shipments were meant for research to help develop detection systems and vaccines. Yet, the procedures designed to make the samples safe were fatally flawed. In 2015, the truth came out. A massive investigation revealed that for over a decade, Dugway had been sending live anthrax to nearly 200 laboratories across the United States and overseas. The samples were never properly killed during sterilization. They were alive, infectious, and traveling by commercial shipping routes to unsuspecting recipients. The shipments went to more than 30 states as well as to South Korea, Canada, and Australia. Some of those labs didn't realize the mistake until weeks later. The official story was that it was all an accident, a procedural oversight caused by faulty testing methods. But the deeper investigators looked, the less sense it made. The Army's own report admitted that Dugway's sterilization protocols hadn't been properly verified in years. Equipment used to test for viability had malfunctioned repeatedly, and staff ignored warnings. The lab's cultures of secrecy had become so normalized that even safety inspectors were kept in the dark. One internal memo from 2014, months before the incident broke, warned that the risk of contamination was unacceptably high. Of course, it was ignored, and when the story finally hit the news, the Pentagon scrambled to contain the fallout. The commanding officer at Dugway was placed on administrative leave, but there were no criminal charges. None. The narrative stayed the same: human error, nothing intentional, no harm done, but for many, that explanation didn't hold up. The anthrax scandal reopened old wounds. If Dugway could accidentally ship live bioweapons across the world without detection, what else might have slipped through the cracks? How of what happens there is truly accidental, and how much is simply hidden behind classification? It also raised another disturbing question. If these pathogens escaped into the open air during Cold War tests, or even today, would anyone outside of those gates ever know? Despite the public embarrassment, Dugway remains fully operational. Security around the base has only tightened. Entire sections of desert have been fenced off and declared restricted zones. Workers undergo extreme background checks, and when something goes wrong, the response is quiet, controlled, and immediate. There are no sirens, no press conferences, and no answers. Today, Dugway Proving Ground continues to operate as one of the most secretive facilities in the country. It's a place where national defense and moral boundaries have always blurred, where experiments in survival have left scars on the land and maybe on the people who live near it. Whether it's bioweapons, UFOs, or something in between, one truth remains constant: Dugway has and was never meant to be understood. It was built to be forgotten. So, when you look at Plum Island, Fort Detrick, and Dugway Proving Ground, side by side, a disturbing pattern begins to form. 3 sites scattered across the country, each born from war and cloaked in secrecy, all built under the same justification: national security. Each of them created to protect us from threats that, in time, they may have helped create. Plum Island gave rise to questions about engineered diseases and how they escaped containment. Fort Detrick blurred the line between medical research and mind control, its corridors echoing with stories of viruses, vaccines, and psychological warfare. And now Dugway, out in the middle of the desert, where both chemical and biological weapons were unleashed upon the air, and where unidentified craft and unacknowledged projects continue to operate beyond public sight. Together, they paint a picture of a government complex that experiments not only with science, but with silence. Yeah, silence so carefully constructed that by the time the public learns what happened, it's already history. And maybe that's the point. Now, I get that we want silence with our weapons and all that, but it goes further than that, guys. I mean, think about it. We're facing, I don't know, I'll stop there. Secrecy buys time. Time to deny, time to destroy evidence, time to shift focus before anyone connects the dots. These facilities, they don't just test pathogens. They test how far they can push truth before it breaks. So, for decades, the people living near them have been told, not to worry, not to ask questions, not to connect what they've seen or what's made them sick. And believe me, I'm sick and tired of being sick, guys. You hear me when I'm reading, my words kind of slur. That's not stroke. That's all neurological conditions from this garbage. Here nor there. But what if the damage is already woven into the fabric of the world around us? What if these proving grounds weren't just testing weapons, but testing us? And I thoroughly believe that. Maybe the real experiment isn't what happens inside those labs, but how much of it we're willing to accept without answers. 3 sites, 3 stories, 1 pattern of denial, and as long as the classified files stay locked, the same question will always echo across the silence. What else have they done that we still don't know about? So, for anyone wanting to look into what we've talked about tonight, there are official records and investigative reports. Some buried in government archives, others sitting right in the public domain, if you know where to look. Check these places out. U.S. Army Dugway Proving Ground Historical Office. Their official site and declassified reports detail the facility's creation in 1942 and its ongoing testing operations. Don't expect to get all that info, though. Look for documents titled Dugway Proving Ground Historical Overview. The U.S. Department of Defense Inspector General reports 2015 through 16. These include the findings from the anthrax shipment investigation detailing how Dugway accidentally sent the live spores to nearly 200 labs worldwide. The Pentagon's public summary was released on June 13th of 2015. Or, of course, our dear friend, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC's Laboratory Response Network records confirm their involvement in assessing live anthrax shipments in response to protocols tied to Dugway's 2015 breach. Declassified U.S. Army Chemical Corps documents, 1940s through the 70s. Many are available through the National Archives and the Defense Technical Information Center, which is a DTIC. They include summaries of chemical and biological tests done in the open air, sometimes referencing the Utah Test Range and Skull Valley region. The 1968 Skull Valley sheep kill, covered by the Deseret News and Salt Lake Tribune in 1968, and later re-examined by environmental historians in Utah's Department of Environmental Quality. You have to search 1968 Dugway Sheep Incident VX Nerve Agent Utah. And the GAO report, Chemical and Biological Defense, Actions Needed to Improve Management of DoD's Biosecurity Program, which is GA0-16-413. Government Accountability Office, 2016. This document directly addresses the biosafety failures at Dugway following the anthrax investigation. As far as books and investigative works, Plague Wars by Tom Mangold and Jeff Goldberg documents post-war bioweapons testing, including Dugway's role. Germs, that's a good book. Biological Weapons and America's Secret War by Judith Miller, Stephen Engelberg, and William Broad. Covers Fort Detrick and Dugway operations in depth. Check that one out. The Utah UFO Display by Frank Salisbury, a credible first-hand chronicle of UFO sightings in and around the Dugway area and the Great Salt Lake Desert during the 1960s and 70s. Let's not forget the Freedom of Information Act. Freedom of Information Act, FOIA archives. Multiple FOIA requests have yielded declassified photos, maps, and chemical test summaries from Dugway Proving Ground. A good starting point is a National Security Archive at George Washington University. Eyewitness testimonies and local accounts are very important. So, Interviews and statements compiled by Utah residents found in archived newspaper features from Tool Transcript Bulletin and the Salt Lake Tribune, often recounting strange aerial phenomena and government cleanup operations near Skull Valley. So, this is Sue, and you've been listening to Origin Unexplained tonight. We've uncovered site number 3, Dugway Proving Ground. We've now traced the shadow line from Plum Island to Fort Detrick to the Utah desert, and what we've seen along the way isn't conspiracy. It's history, buried under decades of silence. These are places built to protect us, yet surrounded by sickness, secrecy, and stories that never seem to end. Maybe that's the real test. How much truth can the public handle before the curtain drops? Again. Remember, every rumor starts with something real. Every denial starts with someone who knows too much. And somewhere out there, another facility waits for its name to be spoken aloud for the first time. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never stop asking what lies beneath the surface. Because the moment we stop questioning, the experiment wins. And I'm Sue, and this is Origin Unexplained. And if you have a story that you would like told, or you would like to be on a podcast telling your own story, email us at originunexplained, and that's UNX, no E, PLAINED, @gmail.com.